The U.S. Marine Corps today declared as killed in action, by the way, those 2 helicopter pilots who were missing after last week's fighting with Iran. The Marines said that Captain Stephen Leslie and Kenneth Hill reported hostile radar had locked onto their Cobra helicopter just before it disappeared in the Persian Gulf. The Senate today delayed starting the debate on ratification of the United States-Soviet medium-range missile treaty until May 11th. And then, only if serious new questions about the INF treaty are resolved. NBC's Andrea Mitchell reports tonight, the new problems come just a month before President Reagan leaves for the Moscow summit.
Even as Soviet and American scientists were simulating a joint underground nuclear test today, hoping to lay the groundwork for a future test ban treaty, their governments were stumbling over the INF treaty, the one treaty they've already negotiated. Democratic Senate leaders announced serious problems with the treaty, making it less likely that it will be ratified before the Moscow summit at the end of May.
The worst thing we could do for arms control is to rush this treaty to the point that we don't know what it means, we don't have clear understandings, and we have disputes with the Soviets after ratification.
Some of the last-minute problems. The Soviets now say U.S. inspectors cannot look inside containers that hold sections of missiles. The Soviets want to restrict American inspectors to certain areas of missile sites. And the two sides disagree over whether the treaty covers futuristic weapons such as lasers.
In these technical talks, the Soviets have advanced positions on some issues that are more restrictive than the provisions of the INF treaty. That, of course, we can't accept.
Administration officials believe the Soviets will back down. They are less sure about the Senate.
We intend to be very careful. We intend to make sure that these loose ends are tied up.
At the earliest, the Senate will start debating the treaty only 11 working days before Mr. Reagan leaves for the summit. Going empty-handed would be worse than embarrassing. It could hurt future arms talks. The president last week.
It would put a strain on the summit if the Senate has not ratified the treaty by the time we go there.
Tonight, the White House is accusing the Democrats of procedural shenanigans. But the treaty could be delayed even further by a threatened filibuster from right-wing Republicans. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News at the White House.
And NBC's John Cochran tells us tonight that administration officials are now cautioning that a tentative plan for Panama's General Noriega to step down is not yet a done deal. The officials also said they still would like Noriega to agree to leave Panama at some point after he gives up power. New labor unrest in Poland is spreading tonight. Steelworkers struck in the south of Poland today, joining striking steelworkers elsewhere in the country. And the leaders of the banned trade union Solidarity called on shipyard workers in Gdansk to get ready to join the strike next week. NBC's Paul Miller in Poland reports tonight that what the workers want are higher wages.
At the massive Lenin steel mill, perhaps as many as 15,000 workers have joined a sit-down strike to demand higher wages. It's already the biggest labor protest since martial law was imposed in 1981, and now the unrest has spread to a second factory 120 miles away. The strike is a reaction to government attempts to reform Poland's economy, which disintegrated during years of unrest and martial law. Prices were raised 45% this year. In Warsaw, people lined up to buy food from private sellers who now charge less than government stores. Many people say they can't make ends meet. Students are rallying in support of the strikers. Other workers say they're ready to strike too. The government has good reason to worry things may get out of hand. Since World War II, 3 governments have been forced from office by mass protests over economic changes. Today, spokesman Jerzy Urban tried to downplay this latest confrontation.
I don't think that the situation today in Poland is dramatic.
It is certainly not as dramatic as the 1980 protests, in which the Solidarity trade union was created. Solidarity is said to be behind the current unrest. Its leader, Lech Wałęsa, said today, strikes are the only means of struggle. He predicted widespread unrest if the government resorts to violence. So far, the government of General Jaruzelski has been careful to avoid violence. Instead, it is putting Solidarity leaders in preventive detention. The government normally rounds up solidarity leaders just before May Day, May 1st, which is a traditional day for anti-government protests. In recent years, those protests have been largely symbolic. This year, the government faces a renewed challenge to its authority. Paul Miller, NBC News, Warsaw.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev today opened a whole new era in relations between the church and the Soviet state. He met with leaders of the Russian Orthodox Church, the first meeting of this kind since 1943. According to the Soviet news agency TASS, Gorbachev deplored what he called the tragic mistakes made by Stalin in his treatment of Christians. They were often singled out during the Stalinist violent purges. Meanwhile, American Christians were making their own statement in Washington today, a mass march to demonstrate their faith is thriving despite television evangelist scandals. Organizers described the rally as non-political, but in a videotaped address, President Reagan said it was prayer that enabled him to continue in office. An estimated 150,000 Christians participated today. When British commandos recently killed 3 IRA terrorists on Gibraltar, it touched off a whole new cycle of death and violence in Northern Ireland, and now there's a documentary that challenges the official version of the commando attack. As NBC's Stephen Fraser reports tonight, the British government didn't want this documentary to air, and that has touched off another dispute.
Despite the government's attempts to stop it, the program called This Week was broadcast nationwide in prime time. It described an IRA plot to explode a car bomb in Gibraltar, the plot's discovery by British intelligence, and the joint British and Spanish operation to track the bombers and kill them. In the program, eyewitnesses said the terrorists were shot without warning, 2 of them as they raised their arms in surrender, the third as he ran away.
There was no exchange of words on either side. No warning, nothing said, no screams, nothing, just the shots.
How close were the 2 men together?
About as far as I am from you. Say 4 feet.
Really close range?
Oh, yes. Yes, undoubtedly. I mean, close enough. Let's put it this way. I think with 1 step he could have actually touched the person he was shooting.
At the time, the government said the terrorists were challenged and responded with threatening movements. The killings triggered last month's outbreak of violence in Northern Ireland, in which 9 people died, and renewed accusations that Britain maintains a shoot-to-kill policy for Irish terrorists. The government says broadcasters were irresponsible to air the program before a Gibraltar coroner's inquest into the shootings scheduled for June.
If you ever get trial by television or guilt by accusation, that day freedom dies.
What the government wanted to arrange was suppression of a program which they thought was inconvenient to the government. Remember that in the House of Commons, the Foreign Secretary announced that the shooting was necessary.
The government's attempt to block the program leaves it with 2 problems tonight: accusations that it tried to muzzle the press, and renewed concern about the legality of its operation against the terrorists on Gibraltar. Stephen Fraser, NBC News, London.